So right now we're seeing this big hype on machine learning and large language models and all these things. And I almost dare say it's impossible to keep an overview.
Katja Hose, professor of databases and AI.
Because if they have a couple of thousands papers per year, I don't know anyone who is able to read all that. So in that sense, it's going at an insane pace. But on the other hand, so all of these papers, 20, 30 years ago, you had papers that really had a huge contribution and huge influence on things because they were laying the foundations to some big things. Papers nowadays don't have that amount of novelty anymore. It's more like smaller things and much more specialized. You need an overview of the big field, and then you dive into a very specific specialization that is much more specialized than it used to be.
Bonded by Science, proudly presented by Noble Blocks.
Thank you so much, Katja. Professor Katja Hose, for joining us today on Bonded by Science. I'm really excited to go through your journey to becoming a professor, and a very accomplished one at that, but also in some of the research you're doing itself, because it seems to me that you're focusing on how how is knowledge generated? How do we contribute as a society to knowledge? And then how can we extract that information that we are generating? And so you're working across that spectrum. I know you've worked with various domain experts as well in that spectrum. So you have, a much more broad overview of potentially differences in different domains. And maybe that will come out in our conversation today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me. Looking forward to this.
So you, I know that you have a family, and I know that you've been working for a very long time at developing your career. I'm quite curious to hear, if you had to sum it up, how much time and effort has it taken you to get to where you are today?
That's a difficult question. I mean, it's not easy to sum up because for most researchers, it's not like a private life and work life are totally separate. So at some point it all merges and it is one big soup of time, and then it becomes really hard to measure. But in the end, I think I can say it took a lot of effort. But it's of course difficult to measure and say exactly how much.
What do you suppose people don't realize when it comes to effort? What do you think a lot of people underappreciate or overlook when it comes to the type of effort that is required to, after you graduate with your PhD, and maybe if you're lucky, you get your postdoc position. So if you think about that transition period, what was the effort required there?
I mean, it's not like you have great ideas or you can plan to have them at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So inspiration comes when it comes. And then, and if it's on a weekend, then it comes on a weekend, and then it's kind of willingness and the effort to just at least make a note and follow up on that later. But in general, it's more like, well, you have to have a lot of stamina or perseverance, or in plain English, stubbornness. So it's about not giving up. So if you have an idea, then it's the main thing is not to just be discouraged easily and not to give up. And that's on my personal ranking. There's a genius obviously helps to get where you want, but just being stubborn enough to just hold on and not give up is even more important.
I understand. Yeah. So would you say that you experienced people telling you that's not a good idea, or did you ever share your ideas before they came to fruition?
That's actually an interesting aspect of me. So, I mean, it started in school. So I had a math teacher who didn't really think that math is for girls. And instead of discouraging me, I just had this, okay, now I'll prove you wrong. So whenever somebody told me this is not for you, then I felt like extra challenged to actually do it and just prove them wrong. And then many good ideas that I had or worked on were in collaboration with other people. So Because if you talk and discuss and spare with other people, then ideas materialize or expand in ways you just can't really easily do it in your local dark chamber.
What is the best outlet for you as of late for getting into these types of discussions? Where have some of the best collaborative ideas emerged?
I mean, it depends on what kind of collaboration. So within the discipline, conferences are a wonderful place to find other people that work on not the same areas, but similar ones. So in that sense, having these really technical foundational ideas, that's conferences where you meet and discuss people. But when it comes to different disciplines, then you won't meet them at a computer science conference. And there, I think it's just being a bit social, just there talking to people and seizing the opportunity if you meet them somewhere, just to chat and being naturally interested in what it is they are doing. And that's where I got some ideas from.
Okay, so if your, let's say your domain expertise is in biological systems or environmental impact, then those individuals should come to computer science conferences, and vice versa. You would say like computer scientists should start visiting other conferences. I know people do this, so it's not like it's groundbreaking and we're revealing something for the first time. I'm just wondering, how often have you actually witnessed, non-computer scientists coming to the conferences and trying to engage with?
Actually, pretty rarely.
It's pretty rare. Yeah.
And it's pretty, because you need certain types of people who are just willing to live through an entire week of talks they don't understand anything about, just to meet someone they can talk to. I mean, for me, it happened much easier in university events. So that's where I met Max Albertson. There was a talent event at Aalborg University, and we just talked.
Right. So would you say then that conferences are great for networking with people within your own domain, but they're not quite at a state where they really facilitate multidisciplinary collaborations or have an ability, like we haven't really reached that state of a conference that would allow this cross collaboration to emerge? Because you just said the one that worked for you, and of course we cannot generalize to everybody, but the one that worked for you was the cross collaboration was much easier, like within the university environment, but within your domain, it's the conferences. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, I mean, there's once in a while there's a workshop or some event that tries to reach out. That so in my domain there are some workshops on crossing towards biology or medicine. But then you would still have more of the computer scientists there than the domain experts.
In your journey to becoming a full professor, because a lot of people have that as one of their career goals, right? To really go through all the steps. Can you think of like one or two skill sets that you acquired very early in your career, or maybe at some critical point in your career that you would attribute some of your success to?
Being stubborn, you mean? I mean, that's one. I think one of the skills that actually helps a lot, just this perseverance, just not to give up and just see it through.
How do you suppose you develop that frame of mind?
I don't know. I think I was born with it. Just I think that's what my mom actually says. I was always a bit stubborn. But I mean, it's kind of if people tell me that we need to do it like this because 1, 2, 3, that's fine. But if people tell me that's not because I say so, I just start questioning until I understand that it makes sense. So maybe it's this just not accepting things just for a fact, but just asking why is that?
I 100% agree with you on, like, if someone says it should be like A, and if I disagree with that, I'll be why? Like, explain why first. And if you can convince me with your why, then we can go with A. And I think, I mean, that has been the basis of some of my personal arguments with people that are in like my close circle. So we have these types of conversations, or you can call it a heated discussion. But I do see that also in my own work life. And if someone like proposes something, I'll be like, well, why? why are you proposing that? And it's not really to be judgmental. It's just to make sure that that they have thought through the why, and then also so that you as an individual can see, oh, maybe I didn't understand something, and now I know the why. So it's like it's sort of like a mutual, like, do you know why, and make sure that I know why. There's a lot of whys happening.
And also a bit of being flexible. So, I mean, I'm happy to acknowledge that I'm wrong. If somebody gives me the right arguments, then okay, I was wrong. I can admit that, and then I adjust my view on life. It's fine. But I need some logical arguments, and not just because I say so.
So computer science is like, it's a huge field, and it's like a massive umbrella. And as you stated earlier, you can have, overlappings with other domains. So then that creates other types of niche collaborations within the umbrella of computer science. As a whole, how do you feel like everything is accelerating under computer science right now? I mean, is there more information coming out than people realize? Like, what is your impression of computer science generally? And then I would like to talk more about the work that you're doing.
I mean, it's going faster in certain fields, not all. So right now we're seeing this big hype on machine learning and large language models and all these things. And I almost dare say it's impossible to keep an overview. Because if they have a couple of thousands papers per year, I don't know anyone who is able to read all that. So in that sense, it's going at an insane pace. But on the other hand, so all of these papers, it depends. So 20, 30 years ago, you had papers that really had a huge contribution and huge influence on things because they were laying the foundations to some big things. Papers nowadays don't have that, let's say, that amount of novelty anymore. It's more like smaller things and much more specialized. And then it just is about not, you need an overview of the big field, and then you dive into a very specific specialization that is much more specialized than it used to be.
I 100% agree that it's nearly impossible almost in any field of science today to keep track of all the information that's coming out, which is often why people focus on their fields or their niche part within that field. At the same time, when you were speaking, I was actually thinking about pace, because we think about, like, as if new science is coming out or new publications are being produced and made available, they're not necessarily coming out in some serial consequence. They're actually being done in parallel, which can kind of potentially give this inflated view of progress, right? Because you would think that if you look at one person's research line, they tend to build on prior findings, or they build on prior skills, or they build on prior knowledge that they have acquired. So the advancements are more serial, let's say. But if you have two people that are doing the exact same thing, sitting in different locations, they could have the same serial progress, but their output would be double, right? So it's now the total output, the overview is double. That would be an inflated view that we're actually moving faster. We're just producing more. So what do you think about that? Like, do you think that in some way we might be inflating our view of progress when we look at total scientific output?
That's actually an interesting perspective that I haven't really thought about, but I think you're right. There's so many different subdisciplines now. So it's not just one area, there's subdisciplines, and they are sometimes reinventing the wheel. Yeah, so I think there's some inflation, and let's say we're kind of believing we make more progress than actually we do.
What do you suppose we would have to do in order to not have too much repetition of the same work. I mean, in some fields, repetition is really good, right? You want to replicate, how the body responds to a certain condition or a certain exposure so that you get closer to the truth. But not all replication is great, right? So there's certain conditions where it's just a waste of time, it's a waste of money, resources, and obviously persons that have to sift through this information at later times, waste of their time too. What do you suppose is the most obvious thing that we should do? And do you actually think that it's obvious?
Well, it's actually difficult just to find something that is obvious because I actually don't find anything obvious that could fix the situation. It's just a lot more people are doing research nowadays than before. So, and even if everybody publishes as much as the people did earlier, which I think is not true because we publish more. But even if we reduce that, then it's still an absolute more papers to keep track of. So it gets more difficult to at least say compared against the state of the art, and I'm better. Even that is more difficult now, and I don't have any good solutions how to fix that.
Yeah, because as we just mentioned, like keeping track of the progress in a field, like what is truly the state of the art, like just to fully comprehend that becomes very difficult, at least for like our minds, maybe not yours, but at least I know for mine, will become very, very difficult. So one of the things that pops in is like, we just need to take more time to think, and we need to pull back on production and actually have like more thought experiments and more discussions and more like take time to listen more. I would really think that could potentially bring us further, but not at the rate that we see publications today. So we will never be able to compete with a KPI that says how many publications are coming out, which one is faster. That will never happen. But I do think we need to pull back a bit.
I agree. So it's but one thing that helps is peer reviews to a certain degree. So and at good conferences, reviewers are told like don't just say some important field or related work is missing or not discussed. Say what it is that is missing so that the people actually know what to do about it. But also that helps only to a certain degree.
Right, because the conceptualization happened a long time ago. So it's not like once you get to that point where you have your data, you collect it in a certain way, you analyze it in a certain way. And I know in your field, the analysis can take, a long time. And the interpretation of those results also takes a long time. So it's not like you can just like retract. So the conceptualization happens early. And by the time it gets to a reviewer, they can only modify what's happened near the end, right? So they can help you modify your interpretations or challenge you on assumptions.
No, actually, typically what they ask for is more experiments. Some change this parameter, use a different data set, or here's another approach, compare against that one.
Regarding data sets, I know with a lot of the projects that you have started and some of the ones that you've been awarded, and I know you've been awarded some very prestigious grants together with other collaborators as well. Is it also to produce the data and then apply your methods of investigation? Is the majority of your grants also for getting data?
So, I mean, I'm in this lucky niche where we develop general techniques that can be applied on any kind of data. So if I'm not all by myself in my own bubble, we just use open data and we are happily running our methods on it. So my grants not necessarily focus on getting the data, but some of the interdisciplinary ones do, of course.
And like, what are your go-to data sources? Like, if anyone was listening and said, "Oh, this sounds really interesting. I'm also developing something, and I need some more open data sets," where would you recommend people start looking?
I mean, since my specialty is graph data, I would recommend Wikidata. It's like Wikipedia, same thoughts. It's about sharing data sets and integrating them, making them accessible for other people.
Can you educate me a bit further on what is it that you mean by graph data? Like, I know what a graph is and I know what data is, but when you say graph data under the umbrella of computer science, I'm thinking that there's more to it than probably the image that's popping into my mind.
Yes, I mean, there's different types of graphs. So one, a simple one or intuitive one is social networks, where each node is a person or a company or whatever that there's a relationship to. So that's naturally occurring graphs. And then there's knowledge graphs where you try to capture knowledge in an abstraction that goes beyond spreadsheets. That's actually a discussion item I often have. Like, people have gotten used to thinking in terms of spreadsheets. So you have tabular data with columns and rows, and people are happy with that. And I say, now imagine this to be a graph. Then people just look at me like, what? How? But it's basically, each row basically becomes a node. Like, if you have a list of people, then each row represents a person, and then that person would be a node on my graph, with all the characteristics in the rest of the row attached to it. And then that node would have relationships to other people, or be diagnosed with a disease or something. And then disease would be another node. And you have these flexible connections so that in the end you can use it for integrating very diverse data. So you have this concept of a person, and you have 5 different data sets that have information about that person. And all you need is a connection from that node to the original data sets to get the additional information about the person from different data sets.
So let's say you have a massive data set with different people with different diagnoses across different countries with different eating habits and different sleeping habits. And let's say, does the data actually need to be generated together? Like, could you, for example, link information just through 2 studies that have a different sample population, but both of them use the same method to quantify sleep behavior? So they use the same, watch at night or the same pillow that tracks your sleep. Would your approach be able to pull more information than I would be able to get if I read them as 2 separate papers?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of, one of the sweet spots of data integration. So you can get very diverse data sets, and then you integrate it on them under one umbrella, one common abstraction. And then that's actually what we do in one of our medical projects. That's about arterial fibrosis. Target is the name. But what we do is we integrate data from different medical studies and different hospitals with different languages, different methods. But in the end, we're building a platform so that people who actually want to analyze the data can just say, I need this, and this. And then we pull the data from the different original studies together in one big, whatever it is they need as output. Could be a spreadsheet.
How does that collaboration actually occur? So the reason why I ask this is because there's lots of existing data sets floating around, different departments, different universities, different researchers. And sometimes people say they post their supplemental data. Sometimes they write, contact me if you want access to this data set, which I can understand why people do that. But like, everything is in such a disarray, and people for the many past years have been very protective of their data sets. And why is that? It's because they spent so much time and effort just to get the grant in order to create or, get the data set, like build that data set. So that's actually their representation of hard work. Now you're coming in on the other side and saying, I would really love that data set. How does that interaction actually occur? And I suppose maybe that's why you said you go to Wiki, because it's available. But if we were really to move forward, how do you foresee that collaboration occurring?
I mean, we need to move beyond a bit protecting your own data. So I understand that. I mean, for me, data is just something I use to show that the method works. But for some people, just getting the data is actually what is important. So I totally understand that they are protective about it. I would probably be as well. But in many sciences, it's also like it's starting off with a very specific hypothesis. Then it's about testing this hypothesis, making a study, getting the data, testing the hypothesis, done. And then that data is being locked away and forgotten. And we need to make people see that if they don't lock away the data, but make it accessible, doesn't have to be open data, but can still be any other kind of model, then we can do something more than we can do right now when the data is locked away. And that's a difficult part, making people see that if they actually share their data among each other, they can do more than they can do now.
Yeah, and do you think it would make sense or be appropriate to then, give credit to those individuals or groups that have curated that data set? Because I know that you're building a method, and you're not trying to steal the thunder of, the data set itself. But you do need really good data sets in order to test like different methods of getting smarter at analyzing data. So how do you go about it now? Do you give credit, or is that why you established these interdisciplinary collaborations?
I mean, that's essentially how these interdisciplinary collaborations came about. So because the practical meaning of or just having at least nice intuitive examples of what I do depend on the meaning of the data. And then it's nice to have someone who actually also sees that there's something to gain by doing proper data management or analysis, and then work together. And what I've been doing so far is I worked with people who we started off with an idea, so I never had to convince or persuade or them or anything. So they knew by themselves that there's potential, and then that's nice people to work with if they also not too protective about, because I won't steal the data. I don't have any stake in publishing any medical findings. It's more the methods how to get there. And in the ideal case, and it happened, we both get something out of it. So we develop the methods, and then in the end, the other side gets the new insights that can be derived. So everybody's happy in the end.
So you have developed, I'm guessing, more than one method based on, yeah. And once you've developed a method and you've proven its like user case, how often do you get the opportunity to then like reapply that method on a new data set with a new collaborator?
Relatively rarely, actually. It's not the same method. It's maybe similar in a certain sense, but there's always some new interesting sub-problems that have to be solved in a new use case.
Okay. So it wouldn't be possible, for example, to have, a Professor Katja Hose website where researchers could come and say, oh, I could apply this method done by, that you and your team, because I know this is not an individual pursuit when you do these methods, it's the team, that they could then go and say, oh, I could apply this method to my data set, and then I would be able to get new insights.
I mean, that would be nice. So people reach out to me and talk to me about these things. I would love that. And of course, the basic methods that we can apply, they work on very diverse data sets, and the domain doesn't really matter. But the methods we develop and can publish in research are more specific than that. So there's kind of a balance. So the general thing of integrating data and making it accessible, yes, that can be done for basically all kinds of data. But I would not set a PhD student on it, because it's difficult to find a new problem in that basic area. And then it's interesting for the PhD student to discuss in detail what are the specific problems of this very specific data set that we can help you with and expand the state of the art in that area.
Okay, so there is no sort of one size fits all method.
I mean, data integration can fit to all.
The data integration can fit to all, yeah. Okay, so if there are people that happen to tune in and they have also like some access to some large data sets, then it could be a great idea then to come into contact. So I'll be sure to put in your contact details together with the podcast.
Yes, please do
and just for the record, it's clear that you want people to contact you. How large of data sets are we talking here? Like, because in medical domains, for example, getting data can be rather difficult as opposed to other type of web scraping data. So there's two different spectrums on what's considered a large data set in your domain.
Yeah, my domain is kind of the larger the better. So not just since I'm not in image processing, so these are less interesting for me. So if we have a huge file with several gigabytes of data for images, I don't have. I mean, my area, I wouldn't benefit too much from the details of the pictures. That's my colleagues. But spreadsheets with all the little details about the patients and the diseases and diagnosis and genes and all these things, that's where it becomes more interesting for me personally.
Once let's say you get your hands on a nice data set, and I know you have some projects that you're going to talk about in a few minutes. If you apply some of the methods, or you have a method and let's say you evolve that method for a particular, spreadsheet of data, or you do some integrations where you're compiling different spreadsheets but have like one common denominator between all of them, what type of insights could one anticipate by applying these methods? Because I'm guessing the reason why you make the methods is not for the sheer joy of making the method, but to really arrive at an aha moment for whoever is trying to interpret that data set.
I mean, the immediate one is when you try to align different data sets, you see you run into quality issues. So you immediately realize if somebody didn't enter the right values into the fields and all these things, so you get in a quality analysis or missing values, these things. And then once you've integrated it, you can the immediate next thing to do is run some general statistics to see where the distributions are, and then higher statistical methods of analysis and so on. And the higher you get, the more you need a domain expert who actually understands what these values mean. I mean, I can usually produce them, but then you really need someone who actually says if this makes sense. I mean, I can see we had the data set where one male patient was pregnant. So that's an obvious case where I see that's probably a mistake. But there's lots of other mistakes that I wouldn't be able to find.
And is it the statistics that you are, extracting or, reporting on, are they visualized? So because you talked about knowledge graphs, so I just want to make sure I understand, like, is it also coming out as a visual so that the individual researcher can actually evaluate that distribution visually? Or is it just like the thinking behind the method that it is having this structure or this form, and that's how it derives its statistics?
I mean, that actually is a bit on a separate layer. So, I mean, one is the method, and then the visualization is actually more or less independent from it. So you have this. I mean, it's a system with different layers, and one is the method where you actually run these algorithms, and the visualization. If you visualize it as curves, graphs, spreadsheets, whatever, it really doesn't matter. So whatever the person needs can be done. And the graph comes in also in different aspects. That's also, if you want to relate to more distant data. So if you put together spreadsheets, you have to align the entire schema of things. You have to know exactly how many columns, which ones matches to what, and whatever. And it becomes more And as soon as it becomes less clear what the data is and how to integrate it, then the graph has more benefits because you can just make links between individuals. So with relations, you always have to match the entire relations or columns. And if you have a graph, you just make an instance and make a connection between two rows. You don't have to care about the rest.
Okay. So let me articulate this back to you. So I'm sure that I have the right understanding. So typically when you run statistics, like you need to have the same number of rows per query, right? But in this case, you can actually have different data sets of different sized matrices. So it doesn't matter. They don't have to be equal. So you can have one that is 1,000 by 1,000. And you can have another one that's 75 by 75 or whatever. And you can still take that information and derive meaningful statistics by the way that you aggregate it together through this nodes or these connecting nodes.
Yeah, so at the time we integrate it, we don't need to know the output. It's kind of capturing all the connections there are without making any decisions yet. And then only when we need the analysis, then we can pull together the data we need. And then we can pull 70 features per person from the different data sets and only those 70. And if one data set has 100 more, we don't care. We just pull out what we need when we need it.
Okay, I have another question. So how large does the individual spreadsheets need to be? Because you said you need a lot of data in order to make these extractions and run the statistics. That part I understand, right? The larger set, the more likely you are to get to, closer to the truth, or at least the statistical truth based on the data. So does that mean that you can aggregate lots of smaller data sets, and then by doing so, you would have a large enough data set to run these methods?
That's one of the things. You can collect a lot of small data sets and combine them into a bigger one.
I think that is extraordinary because there are so many groups working, at least in my field, that I've been exposed to, that funding is limited, but there's lots of but they get a lot of smaller grants to run studies. And what ends up happening is that these research groups have access to pretty much the same type of equipment until they get a grant that allows them to buy something new. So what you end up producing within a research group over a period of 10 to 15 years is you have some common denominators between all of your studies because, well, that's what you're good at running. So you naturally include those into your studies. But individually, each study typically doesn't get enough funding to run it on 10,000 individuals or even 1,000 or 500 for that matter. So they're much, much smaller studies. I would say one of the larger studies that I worked on was closer to 300. And that was a big deal because it was to me, that was a great data set. It was 300, but for someone working in other fields, it's 300 is like a thumbnail. It's like a drop of water. But now you're saying that those individual drops, if you apply some of your methods, I'm not saying it will work for everything, but you're actually giving it the power of a large data set. I think that's really exciting. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I don't think a lot of researchers realize that that is actually a benefit of, would it be right if I then say a knowledge graph, what these knowledge graphs can produce? Would that be the right way of saying it?
I mean, that's the part of the data integration where you can combine different smaller data sets into a big one. That's what I meant when I said that it's one hypothesis, one question's been asked, one study is done, and then it's forgotten. But putting those together and make them reusable is one of the things. And also then there's public ontologies, taxonomies that you can plug it in. And if the taxonomy changes, then just replace it very flexibly. So you don't have to do everything by hand again. Or what is the big one? The gene ontology. So you can just make links to different genes and connect the data that way. And if that changes, you just adapt the links. That's it.
How large is the field that you're working in? So you, I know, are one that is really proactive in this like this approach and this methodology, would you say that it is a niche field within computer science? And if it is niche, how niche is it?
Not anymore. So you have all these, the info boxes on Google that you see every day. That's powered by a knowledge graph. So that's actually, they extracted all the information from Wikipedia into a knowledge graph. And they also scraped a lot of websites and added more facts to the graph. And then when you have a keyword query, they identify the entity, try to match that to a node in the graph, and then they have that node and can pull together the different information they have about that entity. So that's the obvious one that people usually don't realize there is. And there's plenty of applications where graphs are used without people being aware of it. Big times it's also LinkedIn, that's obvious. They have a social network, Facebook, eBay, and then there's lots of other applications recently coming up with large language models. Because one of the areas we're also going to work on is kind of stop them from hallucinating. And one way is to have a knowledge graph in the background with the hard facts that you can actually combine with whatever that LM output or think it knows, and then check with the facts you have collected in the knowledge graph. And then maybe even do some reasoning, like that's the other thing of knowledge graphs that is beautiful. So you know that Shelley is a woman, women are persons, and nobody said that Shelley is a person, but by just knowing these hops in the graph, you can logically infer that, so you can do some reasoning. And that becomes useful to a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Do you know of any commercial entities that have adopted some of the methodologies that you have produced, or would you even know if they did that? Like how would you even?
Since what I did is all open source and open science, they don't have to tell me. But I know some of my former PhD students work at companies now. So one of them is Novo Nordisk, or Norlys, and they, especially the ones at Novo Nordisk, they use still knowledge graph technology to help them with their data problems.
So you, when I was becoming more familiar with your work, I came across a title called was it like dark science or dark matter? And I thought, okay, that's catchy. What is this meaning? I'm just gonna find it here. Okay, yeah. Illuminating. Okay, here it's microbial dark matter through data science. And I think you had another title, which was just called dark science somewhere.
It's two projects actually. So the dark matter was the first one that was a Willem Synergy grant, a small one to start a collaboration that was together with Mads Albertsen from bioscience and Thomas During Nielsen from computer science. And what we did is, we're trying to apply these knowledge graphs and these graph technologies and machine learning to, and that's what the title is, illuminate the dark matter. And that's what's meant is that we don't know a whole lot of the microbes that are out there. We just know that they are there, but we don't know what they are. And then we have the synergy that Mass is good in analyzing DNA sequences and DNA data. And then they have this big Microflora Danica project where they go through Denmark, collect samples, analyze them. And we started working on different problems. So one of them was to help with metagenomic binning. That's a term I wouldn't have used 5 years ago because I didn't know about it. So you learn a lot in interdisciplinary collaborations. But basically, it's kind of using machine learning to identify which microbes were in the sample. And if there's multiple ones, it's difficult to tell them apart. And then once you have these analyzed, you still have a lot of different data sets that you can integrate. and there's collaborators in Aarhus who have information about soil properties and vegetation. And if you integrate those data sets, you can start making interesting analysis. And that's the final goal: predict where should we take a sample that potentially has new species in it. So that's the whole big project that has developed over, I don't know how long it has been, 3 years, 4 years? Still ongoing.
That's not a long time for a project of that magnitude.
I mean, we started out with a small one, and then we got the large Willem synergy to hire a lot of people.
So if I was just to reiterate part of that project and maybe simplify a little bit. So basically you can take a sample, like a human sample, you illuminate the flora that's there, and then you can then relate what you have found to other samples taken like in soil samples. So you're looking for those connections. And then did I get it right? Because I feel like maybe I missed something.
No, I mean, almost. I'm not sure. Let me reiterate again. So what happens is that you know, of course, where a sample has been taken. And then one thing is to analyze the species that are there. And then you have totally different groups of researchers who are interested in soil properties. And then they have analyzed the soil composition of different areas. And then the interesting part is combining these two, because you know the spatial locations of both, and you can integrate that. And then you can say, well, at this place where these microbes were found, the soil properties were ABC.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I got it now. So
and then you can use these extra features.
Okay, so I somehow jumped to like samples were taken from humans, and then we were taking soil samples and trying to connect them.
This project completely avoids humans, which is also good because microbes don't complain about GDPR.
Yes, of course. And those that don't know what GDPR is, it's just basically some rules set up about, you know, protecting patient information, and creates a lot of red tape for researchers that are wanting to run big studies. So you've been through that, and it's difficult and it's time consuming. And I know there are some companies that are actually helping researchers now produce, take on a lot of that overhead so that the researchers can just like run their studies. So if you want a reference, I have one. So here this study is saying, okay, we can actually link information from different smaller data sets again. And I know these are not small data sets because these samples tend to be quite large when they're taken. But again, it's an example of linking smaller, separately run data sets that have found a common denominator, in this case, the spatial location. And hopefully there's like an acceptable time window between the two. And then you can then extract even more information. Yeah.
Yes. You can find out in which environments certain microbes occur, for instance, which you can't really do if you just have the sample data. But let me emphasize, for in this one, the emphasis is not really on small data sets. It's on completely different data sets from different fields with completely different measures. So these data sets are really not any way alike because it's different disciplines, and it's like the computer scientists kind of building a bridges between the different data sets, which is kind of beautiful.
It is beautiful. It is the interconnectedness that I think we've all hoped to achieve. And I think it's something that we need more now, because we do have a lot of siloed knowledge. And at some point, that knowledge doesn't make sense on its own anymore, or things become inexplicable. And maybe, you know, these bridges are definitely necessary. If anyone that's studied neuroscience understands that you need to have a lot of interconnectedness in order to, move, think, make sense, reason, eat.
It's kind of sad, all the unexploited potential that is there, because the answers are hidden in the data sets. You just need to connect them and ask the right questions.
The one project that you described now, is that the same one as the illuminating microbial dark matter? Because
yeah, I mean, those were the two consecutive ones. One, a smaller one first, and then the big one afterwards.
And the illumination part, that's about identifying microbes that we don't know.
Yes.
Okay. And how is that done by combining those? So the spatial location was a common factor between them that allows you to link the data. But where does the illumination part come in?
So I mean, it's also about improving the ways you can run the sequencing analysis. So by that, if you improve them, you can also find out a few things that you didn't find before. And then, of course, in the end, if you know where to send people to take additional samples, like there's soil properties that we haven't seen before, maybe you should take a sample there and then analyzing those. So that's finally, eventually, where the illumination can happen as well.
I understand. I think it's really fascinating work. I'm looking forward to following this project that you guys have been working on, and I hope that you'll send me an update whenever you like. Please keep me in the loop, or I'll follow you on Twitter so that I can hear about the updates from this project. I would like to move forward now and get your future outlook on where things are heading, like the future of academic research. The work that you're doing now is fascinating. You have created some collaborations with other leading experts in, who I happen to know are leading experts in their field. We talked briefly about the numbers of publications coming out today, and there's so many, and that could have a negative consequence on, how research is conducted in the future, because one could look at it from like a mental health point of view. Like, can we keep up with this pace? Are the KPIs that we're running against, are they even realistic to achieve? What is your biggest fear for academic research? Like, what do you think is the ticking bomb that is coming closer?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're almost there. It's kind of, you have these lots of papers, and the meaning of one of those individual papers is less and less, because it just disappears in the flood of papers. And people can fulfill their KPIs, but what does it help with bringing forward the state of the art? And that's difficult.
We've had some conversations in the past, and one of the reasons why I was so looking forward to having you on the podcast was because I know that you have personally experienced some really weird behavior in academia, like when it comes to people reaching out, trying to find ways to incentivize you in order to increase their citation behavior. Are you willing to shed some light on that? Like, you don't have to name any names, of course, but I'm quite curious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least in the database community, it's becoming more and more obvious and well known what the common tricks are. So I can happily share a few. I mean, the basic one is tricking Google's H index, which is actually not very difficult. So, because it counts everything there is, it counts non-peer reviewed papers as well as everything else. So if you publish a lot of archive papers and cite all your papers and all of them, you can inflate your H index and number of citations like mad. And there's no control, because if you do this in non-peer reviewed venues.
Okay. Actually, that never occurred to me. So this is actually why, yeah, I never really cared much about those statistics. Unfortunately, I should have probably cared more. Maybe it would have made my life easier as an academic.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I mean, I never cared about them until I had to compete with people, and then I started analyzing what they do. And that's where I got the tricks from. So self-citations are wonderful.
Well, and sometimes they make sense to self-cite. Like, let's be honest, if you're building a line of research, it makes sense.
No, it makes sense, but there's papers where out of 25 references, 20 are self-citations. And either the research it doesn't have a big difference or a big meaning, or the purpose is to increase the number of references, citations.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate the first trick, and that's, okay, you actually named two now because self-citation is one, which I know is probably one of the most predominant methods that I saw happening. Even as a young academic, I saw it happening. I actually witnessed that as feedback in my reviews. Like, so it's not just that the team itself would self-cite, but the reviewers ask you to cite their stuff. And it makes sense because they've been invited because they're an expert. So they feel that, well, their work should somehow be in that mix of interpretation of the results, or the method or whatever. So that part, so the self-citation, but just to backtrack a little bit on the Google Scholar. So would you say then that one of the reasons that Archive, and I have nothing against Archive, I like Archive, I like what it stands for, but would you say that one of the incentivizations to publish on Archive is actually because it does help increase your H index?
I mean, the official answer you will get is the purpose is to publish and make it accessible earlier so that others can read it. But it can also be used to increase the measurements on Google Scholar.
Right. So why do you suppose Google Scholar hasn't addressed this inflation?
What would they gain if they did?
To be recognized as a more reliable source of an H index? Reputation?
I don't know. So, I mean, there's also researchers at Google.
There is.
I don't think they play.
They
these
probably
tricks,
don't need to.
But I mean, there's no really incentive for Google to make enemies with lots of researchers who do this. I mean, I don't know how many there are.
That's interesting. There's probably more that are publishing on Archive, so they end up pissing off more people than they would in pleasing others. Because the ones that don't know, so they don't have to worry about them. And the ones that do know, do it. So, I think...
Yeah, so probably, I mean, it would be nice if Google had a button that says at least exclude self-citations of things or non-peer-reviewed venues. Would be doable for them to do, but they didn't.
So we like Archive. That is clear. We like the purpose of Archive, its original intent. But this is just an example of people that, if the intention is not to publish early to get your rapid communication out there. I know Archive has also been used for journals to see how much interest there is in a particular paper, and that can actually influence whether or not a journal will accept.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know about that one.
Yes. Yeah. This is it's tracked, and it can be tracked. So this is another potential incentive. So it's actually a bit risky too, right? So if you play the game where you want to get your paper to get lots of attention, and then it doesn't, then that could potentially work against you. But I believe as long as your merits are in the right place, that the reason that you put it there is because you want to get it out, you want people to comment on it. If we steer the course and hold the line, right, then I think we should keep doing it. I just know that we always find ways. I think human nature always finds ways to abuse something that was meant to provide.
Yeah, I mean, it's normal. You have some measure, and then you try to find ways how to trick it. So, I mean, there's this more white and more dark ways to trick it, and the citations in Archive is more on the white area. There's darker ones.
Okay, so you named two tricks now, and we added the third with the peer review citation requests. Do you know of any others?
Yeah, and now we're going in more into the dark area.
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
The black tricks. So one of them is, you can call it power couples. So I write you on my papers, you write me on yours. If both are good, we get twice. And if it becomes pretty unbeatable for someone who works by him herself, because you're competing actually against the CV of two persons together. And that's pretty difficult to detect and measure. But I've also seen that in application rounds where actually you have people doing this, and then, well, you can't beat those numbers of publications with normal standards if you're just working yourself.
I've also witnessed that, and I've been in a position in my career where I've been asked to add someone, and I'm like, but why? Right? Like,
Yeah.
like as we talked about in the beginning, but why? Like, I don't agree with this, but why? Like, what? Like, convince me why I should do this, and then I believe that's when you start to get exposed to how the game is played, and then sometimes people say yes. I mean, I have actually protested in some papers, but I have stopped writing a paper because of that. Actually, further in my career, I just said, screw it. I'm not interested in having people ride on my back. But it can actually be very strategic for a younger researcher to say yes, because then they make friends with someone that could open the door for them down the line. So it is part of the game. It's the way it's played. So I'm so happy that you introduced power couples, because power couples often involves sort of like the innocent bystander. And that's often like the PhD student or the postdoc that has actually done the work on that paper. Very interesting.
One of them, one variation is hierarchical. The other one is peers.
Please explain. Yeah.
So, it's also, one of them, of course, hierarchical, that you have more senior people that can help you open some doors if they're on the paper, and the other way around. The other one is if you're on the same stage. And it's often done within the same group, but it can also be done across groups. If you have PhD students who do this trick, when they apply for postdoc positions, their CVs become pretty much unbeatable if they put their peers on. So if you have a large enough group of, let's say, 8 PhD students, and they all put each other on all of their papers, you can't, if they apply somewhere, it's an impossible CV to kind of beat for anyone else.
Yeah, and I would say that if you're a PhD student and you're not part of that clique and you see it happening, it can be very, very disheartening. I do think, though, that it can make individuals a lot stronger when they're not playing the game, because they win on terms that really matter. But I would imagine we lose a lot of great talent that doesn't really want to participate. And I do believe that talent leaves academia because they don't like the game. And some talent stays because they have set a goal for themselves, right? They said, okay, I really want to get here. I want to be in charge of my own lab. I want to do this. So they accept the rules and they play the game. And I'm not condemning either. I'm just saying that that's just the reality of the situation. But if you look at it, we are potentially losing a lot of great minds.
But it's also difficult to find the one to blame, because people do that because they don't want to lose, because they see what the rules are, and they don't want to lose just because they do the right thing. So it's difficult to blame someone particularly for it.
Absolutely. It's about survival in a very harsh environment. And yeah, you don't want to point the fingers. Other tricks? I know you have more.
Oh yeah, there's collusion rings that also is becomes a more well-known term, and that's on a different level. So it's kind of similar but opposite. So kind of some groups of people make in the ring actually make deals that they will never collaborate, although they work on similar fields, but they review each other's papers and pull them through. So they never create a conflict because they don't collaborate, but they know each other very well, bid on their papers, review them, and pull them through.
Okay, and for those that are unfamiliar with the review process, so when an editor actually goes out and looks for a potential review for a paper, one of the first things they look for is like prior co-authorships within like the last 5 years. So when you don't collaborate with a group, as you have just pointed out here, then that group becomes a potential valid reviewer for that paper. So the point is if you and I work together and published a paper, I would not be a suitable candidate to review your paper because I'm biased. I've worked with you. So the point is that is to remove the bias. And now you're saying, well, like these collusion rings, they're like, okay, well, we know this strategy exists. So let's just agree we don't work together, but we like each other. I'll help you get your papers through. You help me get my papers through.
Yes, but it's easier. I mean, you're thinking more in terms of journals. But we have conferences, so you have a large body of PC members, a large body of papers, and they bid often on the papers they are interested in. So if you can kind of give the others a hint, bid on our papers, it doesn't matter if they are anonymized or not, so you can tell them the title to bid on. And then it's not really, with large numbers, it's difficult for anyone, even if they want to, in the middle, to kind of prevent it, because the assignment is automatic. And then you can pull each other's paper through.
Okay, yeah, because I don't publish in conferences typically. I know that is more common in computer science, that you have conference proceedings, conference papers, and that is like equivalent to maybe a publication that I would have in like a journal, even though this is still a journal. I know that.
Yeah, for us, it's kind of just this, it's a weird discipline where a conference paper tends to count often more than a journal paper.
Yeah, and that's a little bit unfamiliar for other disciplines, but is very specific for computer science. So I'm glad that we clarified that here because...
Well, it's weird that the journals usually are the extended versions of a conference paper, more like the follow-up with more details, but not the main thing.
Maybe it's because in some way you guys have stuck to the traditional ways of actually evaluating recent work, where back in the days you would have a society and you would bring and present your research, and then you would go through that peer review through an actual oral discussion, like a face-to-face, how do you answer this question on the spot discussion of the work that you've been doing. I know that we're operating at magnitudes that simply that would not be feasible, but in some way it somehow encapsulates a little bit of the...
That's actually a good question. I never really tried to find out where the differences in computer science come from. Why we do it differently.
I guess we can do some research, right? It's a good thing we're researchers and we can figure that stuff out.
Maybe we can ask someone who listens to share their wisdom with us.
Please. Or some other tricks that we haven't yet uncovered. Do you have any more? Because I'm like, feed me.
No, that's we went from the white tricks to the darkest ones I know. So there might be more. Oh yeah, wait, there's one more. You can generate conflict. So if you write a paper and you know who is in the PC of a conference and who should definitely not review it because they would probably kill it, you can add some co-authors on your paper that create a conflict with the others you don't want them to review.
That's so premeditated. That's
the most recent run I discovered. I was surprised too.
Okay. There was actually Retraction Watch. I don't know if you ever read any of their announcements, but They uncovered a loophole that some authors that were working, like some journals, I think it was like part of the editorial team or people that had access to publications before they actually go to print, they were like removing the DOIs, or they were manipulating the metadata associated with like a paper and replacing it with their own. So even, yeah. So this is a technical loophole. I'll send you the article. And we actually had a post on it on Noble Blocks not that long ago. But yeah, they found a loophole, and there was a group of researchers that actually uncovered this. And then they made a publication on it, which is why I was able to read more about it. So yeah, they essentially found a loophole. They changed the metadata. So like if you were to say you referenced me in your paper, then they would go in and they would like remove like my DOI or like my, metadata associated with my reference, and they would insert their own, and nobody checks it after. So like it's so strange that it's very scary. And it's because when the journal then sends the information to, I think it's like Scopus, and the different, databases, they don't have like a screening mechanism to check all of this. So it just like, it's like a blind spot in that transition.
I mean, we had a student project a few years ago that unfortunately didn't lead to too much, but we're kind of trying to extract the reference list from publications and then check the official references that are going on Scopus or whatever else, and checking what is missing. I didn't think them of being wrong, but we only wanted to check how much is missing.
I can't remember exactly how they like discovered it, but it was something like the citation. It was like this one paper had a high citation rate, but only a few downloads. So I think it created an aha moment for someone to say, how is that possible? Like, yeah, how are you getting cited? No one's reading it. So, and then they sort of used that as the the trail of crumbs.
Now, I would have more expected that one of the researchers found that the reference of their paper was manipulated.
No, I mean, I have experienced where I thought that I should have been referenced in something and then it wasn't. But that, that's probably my ego. But I think this was just an aha moment for someone. And they actually come from like computational science background. So they had the skill sets in order to investigate more thoroughly, like what was the mechanism for this to actually happen. Yeah, really interesting results. So that kind of goes into the list. We have a really fantastic list. I can't wait to push this out. It's a scary one, but I think it's people like would do well to know that this is what is going on. It's how the game is played. And I really, really hope that in the future, people feel confident enough in their own skin.
I mean, it sounds a bit dark what we talked about, like everybody's doing it. So it's by far not everyone. It's just certain kinds of subgroups that are doing these tricks.
But I think we've all been exposed. We've all seen it. I think we've all seen it, or we've witnessed it at some point in our career.
And then, I mean, I just feel very angry, disappointed, helpless, because you can't really change it. I mean, luckily, I'm already full professor, so I don't die if my papers don't get published a lot. So, but I think for young researchers that have to compete based on these tricks that are being played, it's more critical.
Let's say we moved away from some of these, like the H-index, and then how would you, like if someone said, I'm going to change this, and I need some ideas on how to evaluate better, the impact of a paper or its influence. I mean, do you have any immediate thoughts that come to mind? I know I'm springing this on you.
Actually, I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, the easy one is to just click on remove self-citations and non-peer reviewed stuff. That takes away a lot of the easy ones. And then I don't know the specifics, but I'm pretty sure there's plenty of other proposals on indexes that can be done and computed. It's just they never gain traction.
Right. So there needs to be a bigger movement for people that really care to say, well, yeah. And I think this is where funding bodies can exert their influence, and universities, they need to be the ones to step up and say, well, we don't use your H-index.
Wasn't that in the Netherlands, where the H-index is removed from any application process? So they are advised to ignore it, as far as I know. I mean, if they do it, I don't know. But I think the official policy is that the H-index shouldn't be a formal criteria.
So that will help with one, but it doesn't change how many references are in your reference list, right? So it's a start. It's like removing your photo from a CV application.
Yeah, it's also difficult to kind of, how to measure impact. There's no real measure.
That is the big question, I think, for researchers and for universities and for, funding bodies that really want to, push research funds in the right direction. They want to give it to teams that, working on real problems, but also have the capacity to ensure that it gets out into society, or that it, they don't have to be the same two groups that facilitate that transition. So we had Professor Lorenzo Messiah on Bonded by Science, and he talked about, like, he does a lot of research in soft robotics and rigid robotics, and he's like, yeah, I've developed and I've laid the groundwork for like this, this technology and this invention. He says, but it's not me that takes it and then turns it into the company. He's like, this is what I'm good at. And I 100% agree with that way of thinking. I think that there are some researchers like me, as you know, I like to bridge the gap. So I prefer to be more on the intersection. But not everybody wants to be at that intersection. And then I really feel like there's a gap on the other side. Like there's, like, who's lining up? Like also for your methods. Like who is lining up to say, I'm gonna make sure that this gets out into society. Like, you've done great work, great innovation.
Yeah, it's difficult, but I agree that I wouldn't be the one either. So I don't want to found startups that do it. So I'm just not. I feel like I'm not a type for it. It's a different type of people you need to really run the risk and the effort and also the excitement of making a startup. I know a couple of those people, and I admire their at least courage to dive into these things. But personally, I prefer to stay at my desk, develop the methods, and hopefully inspire other people to take it further.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've seen as, like, there are different types of researchers, and I think we need the spectrum of researchers. But I do see that there is a gap for researchers that want to try to commercialize their findings. And the reason why the researcher, may need to do it is because if they don't, nobody else will. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to make. I'm not saying that we should require researchers to do it, but those that do are rare. And we need more of we need to make that less rare.
It also has a different aspect. So if you spend all your time on bringing it to real life impact, you lose traction on the research side. So you kind of have to balance what it is you're measured on in the end. And that's the other risk. So if professors makes a startup and focus on that for a while, there's probably less papers. And then in the end, you get less funding because you have less papers, and all these things kind of multiply. So it's difficult to balance all these different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have tried to walk that line.
But also sometimes, if you have some fundamental research, the direct impact is not visible often when you do it.
No, and that's the spectrum, right, of different types of researchers. Basic, and then you have the applied, and then you have, like, you hope that you have that transition. And as we just discussed, while I believe that we are those that are quite rare that actually take it out, my concern is that at some point someone's going to say, why are we doing all this research? It's not making any impact, because we haven't created a safe space for researchers to make that transition, or we have been poor at communicating the value of our research, or we have been poor at training individuals to become competent at that intersection. Either way, we have a lot of innovation and not enough people that are willing or even able to take it out. That is my concern, is that if we don't address that, then nobody will have a job at the end of the day.
That's also true. But let me also mention that some of the research that is done, we just don't know that the companies are using it. Also for me, so all this knowledge graph work, companies are using it, just normal people have no clue they do. So there's also something more than just going out and making a spin-off. But some of the things are actually getting used without people being too much aware of it.
Would you like it if companies said, "Great work," like thumbs up, we've found this super useful?
Of course.
Yeah, I think there are groups around the world that are thinking the same thing, and individuals too. I know some companies that are starting to develop new applications on blockchain. As you know, I've been working with Novoblocks, which is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. And, they're looking for ways to make sure that scientists get acknowledged for their work that they're doing. That's one thing. They're also looking for ways to keep the costs of publishing down and keep it, a better reflection of the actual cost to publish rather than paying for prestige.
That's the other benefit of conferences.
That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. But I know that there are some other companies on blockchain that are trying to develop ways that whenever like a publication comes out, if anyone then uses that knowledge from that publication, then it gets sort of logged in the system that knowledge has been contributing to something. So like every time it gets called up, then you would get a kickback, and you can decide what that kickback could be. Like you could take the monetary benefit, or the university could take the monetary benefit and push that into research funds. Or it could just be an acknowledgement, which is good for your CV, a proper one.
Yes, I think personally, all researchers like if somebody says, "Hey, I read your work, we're using it." So I think personally, for everyone's ego, that's a nice brush. And then, of course, if there's something more coming around, funding or anything else, even better. But I think even just recognizing or just saying, giving a bit of thumbs up, I like your work. That's what people love to hear.
Yeah, it's the encouragement that I think is missing nowadays, because we're so busy at being competitive that we never, like in the research world, you don't go around and say thumbs up unless you're on Twitter or X and you say great research by such and such team. I've seen that so many times.
It happens sometimes at conferences. So I'm now old enough that sometimes a student talks to me like, yeah, I've read your work, and then I feel like, yay, I've achieved something. But we need a certain level of seniority for that to happen.
Yeah, I guess what we're getting at is don't underestimate the value of telling a researcher that you read their work and that you appreciate what they've done, even if you didn't understand all of it. Somehow it has inspired you, and especially if you're a company. I think, if companies can start adopting the insights that are generated, I think it will really help research maintain its relevance much more so. And it's definitely something that I stand by today. So I'm definitely going to put some links into some of your projects in our descriptions. And yeah, I look forward, and I really do hope that some researchers reach out to you with some of the smaller data sets that they have accumulated over the course of, 5-10 years on a particular project. I think it would be just fantastic to see the methods that you have developed bring more insight, especially given that we don't need any more siloed research running side by side in parallel anymore. We need to start having some more serial steps. As backward as that sounds, because I know everything is about parallel processing right now.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for summarizing that. So I'd really be happy if somebody reached out with data problems. I'm not promising I can solve all of them, but it's definitely interesting and fun to look into different areas and figure out how we can help each other.
Absolutely. All right. Oh, I actually have one more question. I'm sorry. Yeah. When researchers develop and push out their data in tables, is there anything in particular that you could tell them that would make accessing that information much more easier for, like, I know you do some web scraping or you're pulling off information when you dive into some of these papers. I know you use Wiki as a data source, but I think there's a lot of researchers
There's a lot more. First thing is documentation. I mean, a column label A31 doesn't help really people to understand what the meaning is. So documentation is one thing. That should also include provenance. So when was this data taken by whom? How was it created? When? And all these metadata is very important.
Like on the table, right?
Yeah. So I mean, or on the different columns even, or even in different cells. The more fine granular, the better. So you could even go down to say this part was created by person 1, this part by person 2. And then you can say, well, if they measure the same things, one of them did a mistake, the other one didn't, and then you just can ignore part of the data. But you need to know these things.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would never have thought to include in a data table like the date of acquisition.
I mean, it's not necessarily part of the table itself, but the metadata for it.
And when you say metadata, where does that actually occur?
So, I mean, metadata can be very structured, and there's standards for providing metadata. But I'm already happy if it's documented in some form somewhere that we can dig out when needed and then bring it into a certain form.
So it could actually be outlined in the methods, for example.
Yes, just well enough specified so that people like me or non-experts in that field understand what is going on. And then there's, of course, this whole area of fair data principles to make them findable and accessible and integratable and what was our referenceable. But it's kind of very important to have these kind of metadata, and there's portals for it even. They still focus too much, for my taste, on making the data published and findable, but they don't really focus on making them usable.
Okay, that's so very great to know, because I know, like, when NobleBlocks gets further in its development, I think it will also like to make sure that some of these,
But yeah, fair data principles have become standard also in lots of EU projects.
But also including making sure that they are highly usable. So, as you said, discoverable, readable by the human eye is one thing, but making it usable for machines, yeah.
But still, as I said, so far the focus is more on. Everybody feels like this is just an annoying requirement to do it and just publish the data, but I haven't come across many who actually wanted to use it, and that's the interesting part for me. Working together with people who actually see the potential and want to use it, because so far it's really just an annoying task that people have to fulfill, and they just fulfill it, but they don't really feel the need.
Yes, it's because we're just so, like, getting to the point of making the publication is so much work. I've been in that position where, like, oh, now I gotta make my data tables, or I gotta add all the supplementary information. You're like, but everything is there. And yeah, I totally get it.
And then it's no immediate benefit for the one who's doing it. So what is the benefit of doing an excellent documentation? It's not measured anywhere. You don't get any credit for it. It's just the next one who could find it and use it. That person has an easier life. So the incentive is not really there, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, that's great insight. Thank you so much, Katja, for taking the time to be with me today on Bonded by Science. And I have learned so much about your work and its applications. And I'm really happy that you took a position and shared your position about the games that are played, where I think we both landed that the games still need to be played. We just don't like the rules of the game. Everybody knows that they're there. We do need something to change moving forward. I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah, but let me just add, you can get through it without playing. It's just good to know that you can't beat certain people who play the games. So I wouldn't really want to say people you have to do it, because you can. I mean, I didn't play those games, so you can still do it. But it's better for people to know that if you compete against others who play the game, you can't win. And it helps your own mind to get peace if you acknowledge that you can't beat the game.
You know what this reminds me of? It's like all the Photoshop that people used to do to their pictures, right? Like you're not competing against a real person, or your body is not supposed to look that way. So yeah, I guess the best analogy is like, don't fall for the Photoshop tricks.
It's a nice analogy, yeah.
Okay, well, we are living in social media times. So yeah, thanks again for joining. Really a pleasure to have you here. And I hope that we get to speak again soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It was great fun. And yeah, let's see if there's another time.